The crosshairs trembled slightly as Sergeant Elena Vasquez adjusted her grip on the Barrett M82 sniper rifle. 20 stories below, in the dusty courtyard of the abandoned textile factory, 20 American soldiers huddled behind overturned vehicles, while enemy fire rained down from 3 directions. Her radio crackled with desperate voices. "We're pinned down. Request immediate air support. Negative on air support. The weather's too rough for choppers. Then we're sitting ducks here." Elena's finger found the trigger. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper positioned in the factory's water tower, the one picking off her fellow soldiers one by one. The bastard had already taken down 2 good men, and he was lining up for a 3rd shot. 1 bullet. That's all she had for a clean shot before her position would be compromised. The wind was gusting at 15 miles per hour from the southeast. Distance, 847 meters. She'd made longer shots before, but never with 20 lives hanging in the balance. Never when she wasn't supposed to be here in the first place. "Permission to engage?" she whispered into her radio, static. Then Colonel Morrison's gruff voice. "Vasquez, you are ordered to maintain reconnaissance only. Do not engage." "Sir, they're going to die down there." "That's an order, Sergeant." Elena watched through her scope as the enemy sniper adjusted his position, drawing a bead on Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a guy who'd shown her pictures of his twin daughters just that morning. His wedding ring glinted in the afternoon sun as he pressed himself against the twisted metal of a burned-out Humvee dat. She made her choice. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The .50 caliber round screamed across the desert air. And 2.1 seconds later, the enemy sniper's head snapped back in a red mist. His rifle tumbled from the water tower, clattering to the concrete below. "Hostile sniper down," she reported calmly. "Area secured." The courtyard erupted in cheers as the pinned soldiers broke from cover, their extraction finally possible. But Elena's radio remained ominously silent. She knew what was coming. Court-martial. Disobedience of direct orders. End of career. All because she'd done what any good soldier would do: save her brothers in arms. All because she was a woman who dared to pull a trigger in combat. 3 weeks later, Elena sat ramrod straight in the wooden chair facing a panel of 5 officers, all men, all looking at her like she was something they'd scraped off their boots. The military courthouse in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, was sterile and cold, with fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. Colonel Morrison sat at the prosecutor's table, shuffling through papers with the satisfaction of a man who was about to prove a point. He'd been fighting women in combat roles since Elena had joined the army 6 years ago, and now he had his chance to make an example. "Sergeant Vasquez," he began, standing with theatrical precision, "you are charged with willful disobedience of a lawful order, engaging the enemy without authorization, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "How do you plead?" Elena's defense attorney, Captain Sarah Chun, squeezed her shoulder. Chun was young, sharp, and one of the few people in this room who believed Elena had done the right thing. But belief didn't always translate to legal victory. "Not guilty, sir," Elena said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Colonel Morrison smiled a cold, predatory expression. "The facts are simple, gentlemen. Sergeant Vasquez was ordered to maintain reconnaissance only. Instead, she chose to engage in combat, directly violating not only my explicit command, but also the military's policy regarding women in frontline combat situations." "Objection," Captain Chun interjected. "The policy regarding women in combat was officially changed 2 years ago, overruled," Judge Advocate General Thompson said without looking up from his notes. The defendant was assigned to reconnaissance. Her role was clearly defined. Elena bit back her response. She wanted to stand up and shout that she'd saved 20 lives. That Mike Rodriguez was going home to his daughters because of her shot, that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. But military justice wasn't about right and wrong, it was about order and obedience. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They called witness after witness who testified that Elena had received clear orders to observe only. They brought in communications experts who played the radio traffic, emphasizing the moment Elena had been explicitly ordered not to engage. The defendant, Morrison continued, put herself and the mission at risk through reckless action. Military discipline exists for a reason. When soldiers, especially female soldiers in sensitive positions, decide they know better than their commanding officers, the entire chain of command breaks down. The way he said female soldiers made Elena's jaw clench. This wasn't just about disobedience. This was about proving that women couldn't be trusted in combat situations, that they'd make emotional decisions instead of following orders. When Captain Chun called Elena to testify, the courtroom fell silent. Elena stood, smoothed her dress uniform, and walked to the witness stand with the same confidence she'd carried into every dangerous situation of her military career. "Sergeant Vasquez," Chun began, "please tell the court about your military record." Elena's voice was clear and professional. 6 years of service. Expert marksman for 4 consecutive years. Completed ranger training, one of only 12 women to do so. 2 Bronze Stars for valor in Iraq and Afghanistan. Marksmanship instructor for 3 years. And on the day in question, what did you observe through your scope? I observed an enemy sniper systematically targeting American soldiers. 2 were already down, and he was drawing a bead on Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Elena's hands remained steady, folded in her lap. The soldiers were pinned down with no air support available. They were going to die. What went through your mind? Elena looked directly at Colonel Morrison. I thought about my oath, ma'am, to protect and defend, to leave no soldier behind. She paused. I thought about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's daughters, who would have grown up without a father if I'd followed orders instead of doing my job. Morrison shot to his feet. Objection. The defendant's job was reconnaissance, not sustained, Judge Thompson said. But Elena wasn't finished. With respect, sir, my job as a soldier is to protect American lives. I had the shot. I took it. 20 soldiers went home to their families because of that decision. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs until Thompson's gavel restored order. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered on discipline, on the importance of following orders, on the dangers of soldiers making independent decisions in combat situations. He painted Elena as a rogue operator who'd put her own judgment above military authority. Tell me, Sergeant, Morrison said, circling her like a shark, if every soldier decided when to follow orders and when to ignore them, what would happen to military discipline? Sir, I believe good soldiers use their judgment to save lives while following the spirit of their orders, even when the letter might prevent them from doing their duty. Duty? Morrison's voice rose. Your duty was to observe and report. Instead, you engaged in unauthorized combat, revealing your position and potentially compromising the entire operation. The operation was already compromised, sir. Our soldiers were dying. That was not your call to make. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Elena met Morrison's glare without flinching. Respectfully, sir, when American soldiers are dying and I have the ability to save them, it is absolutely my call to make. The courtroom erupted. Judge Thompson's gavel hammered repeatedly before order was restored, but the damage was done. Elena had just confirmed everything Morrison wanted the panel to believe, that she was insubordinate, that she believed she could override military authority, that she was exactly the kind of soldier who couldn't be trusted in combat situations. As Elena returned to her seat, she caught sight of the gallery. In the back row sat 20 soldiers, the men she'd saved. They weren't supposed to be here. weren't supposed to show support that could be seen as influencing the court. But they'd come anyway, silent testimony to what her single shot had accomplished. Mike Rodriguez sat in the front of that group, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light, his eyes meeting hers with a gratitude that transcended military protocol. It should have felt like victory. Instead, as Elena watched the panel's faces stone cold, disapproving, already convinced, it felt like the end of everything she'd worked for. The verdict came 2 hours later. Guilty on all charges. Sentence: reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and dismissal from the United States Army. Elena's military career was over. 6 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, and the lives of 20 soldiers. None of it mattered as much as the fact that she'd pulled a trigger when a man told her not to. What do you think will happen next? Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Elena's apartment in Clarksville, Tennessee, was a study in military precision even after her discharge. A bed made with hospital corners, boots lined up with mathematical accuracy, and a single photo on the nightstand, her graduating Ranger class, one woman among 53 men. She'd stared at that photo every morning for 3 months, wondering where it had all gone wrong. The dismissal had been brutal, but the aftermath was worse. Potential employers saw other than honorable discharge, and their eyes went cold. Military contractors wanted team players, not soldiers who'd been court-martialed for insubordination. Civilian companies didn't know what to do with a woman whose primary skill was putting bullets exactly where they needed to go. She was down to her last $100 when the letter arrived. The envelope was expensive, heavy cream paper with a watermark she couldn't quite make out. No return address, just her name written in elegant script, Ms. Elena Vasquez. Not sergeant, not private, just Ms., as if her rank had never mattered at all. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper and a business card. The letter was brief, Ms. Vasquez, your reputation precedes you. We represent clients who value results over protocol, skill over politics. If you're interested in putting your considerable talents to productive use, call the number below. Ask for Blackwater. Compensation begins at $200,000 annually. M. Sterling. Elena read the letter 3 times before looking at the business card. Sterling Security Solutions in Boston silver lettering, with a phone number that had too many digits to be domestic. She'd heard whispers about Sterling during her time in the Army, a private military company that operated in the gray spaces between government policy and mission necessity. They took contracts that the official military couldn't touch, worked in countries that didn't officially exist on operation boards, and paid their people enough to forget about the moral complexities. $200,000. Elena stared at the number, thinking about her dwindling bank account, about the job interviews where prospective employers seemed more interested in why she'd been discharged than what she could do for them. She picked up her phone and dialed. Voice that answered was crisp, professional, with just a hint of a British accent. Sterling Security Solutions, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with Blackwater. A pause. May I have your name, please? Elena Vasquez. One moment, please. Classical music filled the line, something Elena recognized as Vivaldi, though she couldn't name the specific piece. Her father had played classical music during Sunday dinners when she was growing up, back when the world was simpler and her biggest worry was whether she'd make varsity soccer. Ms. Vasquez. The new voice was male, American, with the careful diction of someone who'd spent time in war zones. Thank you for calling. I'm Marcus Blackwater. I trust you received our correspondence. I did. Though I have to ask, how did you know where to find me? A soft chuckle. We make it our business to know where exceptional soldiers end up, especially those who've been poorly treated by bureaucrats, more interested in politics than results. Elena felt a familiar spark of anger. You know about the court-martial. We know about the shot. 847 meters, 15-mile-per-hour crosswind, single kill that saved 20 American lives. We also know about the colonel who decided that following orders was more important than bringing soldiers home alive. So what do you want? We want to offer you a job, Ms. Vasquez. A chance to use your skills for clients who appreciate excellence over conformity. Blackwater's voice carried the weight of authority, but also something Elena hadn't heard in months. Respect. Are you familiar with Kazimirstan? Elena frowned. The name was vaguely familiar, probably from some intelligence briefing she'd half listened to during her last deployment. Former Soviet state? Central Asia. Correct. Oil-rich, politically unstable, and currently experiencing what the State Department diplomatically calls civil unrest. Our client is an American energy company with substantial investments in the region. They need security consultation. Elena knew enough about private military companies to read between the lines. You mean they need people who can shoot back when the local warlords get aggressive? I mean they need professionals who understand that sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to demonstrate the consequences of starting one. Elena walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot of her apartment complex. A few months ago, she'd been one of the Army's top snipers, trusted with million-dollar equipment and life-or-death decisions. Now she was considering whether she could afford rent next month. What's the assignment? 6-month contract. You'd be part of a small team providing security for drilling operations and personnel transport. The pay is $200,000 for the full contract, plus hazard bonuses and full medical coverage. $200,000. It was more money than Elena had ever imagined making, enough to start over completely when the contract ended. But she'd learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. What's the catch? The catch is that Kazimirstan is complicated. The government barely controls the capital city. Outside the major population centers, it's tribal territory with shifting allegiances and a healthy black market in military grade weapons. Blackwater paused. It's not Iraq or Afghanistan, where you had the full weight of the U.S. military behind you. This is more entrepreneurial, Elena understood. No rules of engagement written by Pentagon lawyers. No oversight from officers more concerned with politics than mission success. No court-martial for making the hard decisions that kept people alive. When would I leave? There's a flight tomorrow evening from Nashville to Frankfurt, then on to Almaty. From there, ground transport to the operational area. We'd need an answer within the hour. Elena looked around her apartment, at the few possessions that represented 6 years of military service, at the photo of her Ranger class, at the Bronze Star medals gathering dust in a drawer she rarely opened. The Army had thrown her away for saving lives. Maybe it was time to find people who valued that skill. Send me the contract, she said. Already done. Check your email. And Ms. Vasquez? Welcome to Sterling Security Solutions. The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her phone and wondering if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. The contract was 20 pages of legal language that basically said she'd go where Sterling told her to go. Shoot who they told her to shoot, and keep her mouth shut about everything she saw. The money was real. $50,000 signing bonus would hit her account within 24 hours, with the balance paid in monthly installments. At the bottom of the last page, in elegant script, was a handwritten note. Some missions require soldiers who understand that doing right matters more than following rules. We believe you're that kind of soldier. M. Sterling. Elena stared at the signature for a long time. Then she signed her name and sent the scanned contract back via encrypted email. 24 hours later, she was on a plane to Germany, leaving behind the country that had trained her, decorated her, and ultimately discarded her for the crime of saving American lives. She had no idea that the 20 soldiers she'd saved were about to return the favor in ways she couldn't imagine. The flight from Frankfurt to Almaty gave Elena 12 hours to study the intelligence briefings Sterling had provided. Kazimirstan was a landlocked country about the size of Wyoming, wedged between Russia, China, and Kazakhstan like an afterthought from the Soviet collapse. Oil reserves had made it strategically important, but political instability made it dangerous for foreign investment. The current president, Askar Nazarbayev, was a former Soviet military officer who'd seized power 3 years earlier in what he called a democratic transition and everyone else called a coup. He controlled the capital city of Bishkek and the main oil terminals, but most of the countryside belonged to tribal leaders who changed sides whenever it benefited them. Elena's target was the Tengri oil field, a massive American-operated facility about 200 kilometers southeast of the capital. Meridian Energy Corporation had invested over $1 billion in extraction equipment, but attacks on pipelines and personnel had increased dramatically over the past 6 months. The official government couldn't provide adequate security, and the unofficial government, the tribal warlords, seemed to be behind most of the attacks. Classic resource extraction problem, Elena muttered, reading through casualty reports. 3 American engineers were killed in the past month, along with a dozen local workers. Pipelines bombed twice weekly. Equipment sabotaged almost daily. Meridian's solution was Sterling Security Solutions. Instead of relying on local forces or stretched government resources, they were bringing in private military contractors who could respond without worrying about diplomatic consequences or rules of engagement designed for conventional warfare. Elena's seatmate, a German businessman, heading to Kazakhstan for oil negotiations, glanced at her reading material. "Dangerous place, Kazimirstan," he said in accented English. "My company refuses to work there. Too much shooting, not enough law." "Shooting doesn't scare me," Elena replied, closing the briefing folder. "Perhaps it should," the man said seriously. "The tribes there have been fighting each other for 1,000 years. They see foreign oil companies as just another enemy to defeat." Elena nodded politely, but she wasn't concerned about tribal warfare. She'd operated in tribal regions before, in Afghanistan and Iraq. The key was understanding local power structures and demonstrating strength without unnecessary aggression. Show you could hurt them badly enough that it wasn't worth the trouble, but don't hurt them unless they forced your hand. The approach to Almaty revealed a landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains, brown and stark under an overcast sky. Elena had expected something more dramatic. Her mental image of Central Asia involved either desert or snow-covered peaks. Instead, it looked like eastern Montana, dry and vast and empty. The Kazakh airport was modern and efficient, a reminder that oil money could buy infrastructure, even in remote corners of the world. Elena cleared customs without incident her diplomatic passport, courtesy of Sterling's connections, marked her as a security consultant rather than a mercenary, and found her contact in the arrivals area. He was hard to miss. 6.5 feet tall, built like a linebacker, with pale skin that suggested Northern European ancestry and scars that suggested recent violence. His sign read E. Vasquez in block letters. "You're Elena?" His accent was South African, with the clipped precision of a former military. "I'm Peter van der Merwe. Sterling sent me to collect you." They shook hands. His grip was firm, but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who was confident without needing to prove it. "Call me Elena. How long have you been with Sterling?" 3 years. "Started in Mozambique, then Sierra Leone, now here." He hefted her duffel bag like it weighed nothing. "Come on, we've got a 6-hour drive to the operational area, and I'd like to make it before dark." The vehicle was a heavily modified Toyota Land Cruiser, painted in desert tan with steel plates welded over the windows and run-flat tires that could handle bullet holes. The interior smelled of gun oil and stale coffee dot as they left Almaty's suburbs behind. Peter filled Elena in on the current situation. We've got a team of 8 contractors plus about 30 local security guards. The locals are good for manning checkpoints and basic patrol work, but they're not worth much if things get serious. What kind of serious are we talking about? 2 weeks ago, someone took a shot at our convoy with an RPG, missed by about 10 feet. Last week, they planted an IED on the access road that took out one of our vehicles. No casualties, but it was close. Elena watched the landscape roll past endless steppe broken by occasional villages that looked like they hadn't changed in centuries. Any idea who's behind the attacks? Officially? Nobody knows. Unofficially? Peter shrugged. Pick a tribal leader. There are 3 main groups in this region, and they all hate each other almost as much as they hate us. The Kumyks control the northern territories, the Balkars control the south, and the Kazakhs control the roads between them. They've been fighting over oil revenue since the wells started producing, and our job is to keep them from fighting on. Meridian's property. Our job is to keep Meridian's people alive and their equipment working. How we do that is up to us. They stopped for fuel at a roadside station that looked like a movie set for a post-apocalyptic western. The attendant was a weathered man with Asian features and suspicious eyes who kept glancing at their vehicle's armor plating. He spoke to Peter in what Elena assumed was Russian. What did he say? Elena asked as they pulled back onto the road. He wanted to know if we were soldiers. I told him we were oil company security. Peter's expression was grim. He said the oil companies won't be here much longer. Why not? Because the Kumyk leader, a guy named Dastan Umarov, has declared jihad against foreign oil operations. Claims, we're stealing resources that belong to his people. Elena had read about Umarov in the briefing. Former Soviet Spetsnaz officer who'd turned to Islamic fundamentalism after the collapse. He controlled about 1,500 fighters and had access to military-grade weapons, including anti-aircraft missiles that made helicopter operations impossible. How seriously should we take the jihad threat? Seriously enough that Meridian is paying Sterling $1 million a month for security, Peter said. Umarov's not just another tribal warlord. He's got training, discipline, and ideology. That makes him dangerous. As the sun set behind distant mountains, Elena began to understand what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't just security work, it was a small-scale war in a country that barely existed on most maps, fought over resources that powered the world economy, with rules that changed depending on who was shooting at whom on any given day. Tengri oil field appeared on the horizon like a mirage of industrial civilization. Massive drilling towers rose from the steppe, surrounded by processing facilities, storage tanks, and prefabricated buildings that housed the workers. The entire complex was surrounded by a double fence topped with razor wire, with watchtowers every few hundred meters. Home sweet home, Peter said as they approached the main gate. The guards were locals, but Elena noticed Sterling contractors. Manning the towers, she could tell by their equipment and the way they moved. These weren't rent-a-cops. They were professionals. The compound's interior was a mixture of American efficiency and frontier pragmatism. The main operations building looked like it could have been transplanted from Houston, all glass and steel. And air conditioning. The living quarters were more basic prefabricated modules that provided privacy and comfort without luxury. Elena's room was 10 feet by 12 feet, with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the drill. Towers. She'd lived in worse places, though few had been this isolated. The nearest city was 6 hours away, and the nearest American military base was in another country entirely. A knock on her door interrupted her unpacking. "Elena, I'm Marcus Blackwater. Welcome to Tengri." She opened the door to find a man in his 40s, lean and weathered, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of alert eyes that suggested he'd spent time in very dangerous places. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, but Elena could see the outline of body armor underneath. "Mr. Blackwater, thanks for the opportunity. Call me Marcus. And the opportunity is mutual. We needed someone with your particular skills." He gestured toward the common area. "Mind if we talk? I'd like to brief you on your specific assignment." The common area was surprisingly comfortable, with leather furniture and a big screen TV that was currently showing CNN International. 2. Other contractors were watching the news, their weapons within easy reach despite the casual atmosphere. Marcus led Elena to a conference room equipped with secure communications equipment and detailed maps of the surrounding region. Red pins marked known hostile positions, blue pins marked friendly forces, and yellow pins marked areas of uncertainty. "Your primary responsibility," Marcus began, "is long-range threat assessment and elimination. We've identified at least 6 potential sniper positions within effective range of our critical infrastructure." He pointed to elevated positions on the map. "If someone wants to take out our operations, those are the most likely firing positions." Elena studied the distances. "The longest shot would be about 1,200 meters. Well within my effective range. That's what we're counting on. But there's another aspect to your assignment." Marcus pulled out a photograph of a man in military fatigues, Dastan Umarov, the Kumuk leader I'm sure you've heard about. "Intelligence suggests he's planning a major attack on this facility, something big enough to force Meridian to abandon their operations. And you want me to prevent that. I want you to be ready to prevent that. If Umarov shows up in your scope, and if he represents a clear and present danger to American personnel or critical infrastructure, you have authorization to engage." Elena looked at the photograph. Umarov was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the lean build and alert expression of a professional soldier. But his eyes held something that reminded her of the insurgents she'd faced in Afghanistan, a combination of intelligence and fanaticism that made for dangerous enemies. "What's the intelligence on his location?" "He moves constantly, never sleeps. In the same place twice. But our sources suggest he's been scouting this facility personally, preparing for whatever he's planning." Marcus met Elena's eyes. "The question is whether you're comfortable with potentially taking out a target without explicit military authorization." Elena thought about the court-martial, about 20 soldiers who'd lived because she'd ignored orders and taken the shot. That needed to be taken. "As long as the threat is real and immediate, I can live with the consequences." "Good, because out here, the consequences of not taking the shot are usually measured in body bags." As Elena left the briefing, she realized that Sterling had recruited her for more than her marksmanship skills. They'd recruited her because she'd already proven she would pull the trigger when it mattered, regardless of what the rulebook said. The question was whether that would be enough when, regardless of what the rulebook said, shooting started. Elena's first week at Tengri was about learning the rhythm of the place. Oil extraction was a 24-hour operation, with shifts of workers moving between drilling platforms, maintenance crews checking equipment, and supervisors coordinating the complex ballet of industrial extraction. The Sterling contractors provided a security overlay that was largely invisible to the oil workers, but omnipresent to anyone who knew what to look for. Elena's position was Observation Post 3, a reinforced concrete bunker built into a ridge about 800 meters southeast of the main facility. From her position, she could see the entire compound plus several kilometers of approach routes. The bunker was equipped with advanced optics, secure communications, and enough ammunition to sustain a lengthy engagement. Her daily routine began at 0500 with a communications check, followed by systematic observation of assigned sectors. She logged vehicle movements, noted changes in local population patterns, and tracked weather conditions that might affect visibility or ballistics. It was methodical work that required patience and attention to detail, exactly the kind of assignment that suited Elena's temperament, but it was also boring as hell. "Contact Sector 7, came Peter's voice over the radio on her 4th day. 3 vehicles approaching from the North Road. Elena swung her scope toward the indicated direction, finding the convoy immediately. 2 pickup trucks and a sedan, moving fast but not aggressively. The lead vehicle flew a white flag. "I see them," Elena reported. "Appears to be a diplomatic approach. Copy that. All stations, weapons hold unless fired upon." The convoy stopped at the outer checkpoint, where local guards began the identification process. Elena kept her scope trained on the vehicles, looking for anything that suggested hostile intent. The passengers appeared to be unarmed, dressed in the traditional robes favored by tribal leaders rather than military fatigues. "Op 3, what's your assessment?" Marcus's voice was calm but alert. 3 vehicles, approximately 12 individuals. No visible weapons. Body language suggests negotiation rather than confrontation. Elena adjusted her scope's magnification. The lead passenger appears to be elderly male, probably a tribal elder. Copy. Maintain overwatch. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Elena watched as Meridian's local manager, a nervous-looking American named Patterson, emerged from the administration building to meet with the tribal delegation. Even at distance, she could read the tension in his posture, shoulders rigid. Movements careful, like a man walking through a minefield. When the convoy finally left, Elena's radio crackled with updates. "That was Aslan Kumik," Marcus reported. "Dastan Umarov's uncle and the nominal leader of the Kumik Council. He came to deliver an ultimatum." "What kind of ultimatum?" Elena asked. "Meridian has 2 weeks to begin sharing oil revenues with the local tribes or the attacks will escalate significantly." Elena kept her scope trained on the departing convoy. "And Meridian's response?" Patterson told them he'd relay the message to corporate headquarters, which means no. "So we should expect things to get interesting. Count on it." That evening, Elena joined the other contractors for dinner in the common area. The Sterling team was an interesting mix, former military from half a dozen countries, each with specialized skills that made them valuable in places where conventional security was insufficient. There was Eric Larson, a Norwegian ex-Special Forces operator who handled explosive ordnance disposal. Sarah Mitchell, a former British Army intelligence officer who ran electronic surveillance. James Park, a Korean-American ex-Marine who specialized in close protection. And half a dozen others, each representing different aspects of modern military expertise. "So what's the betting pool on how long before they hit us?" asked Mitchell, picking at her MRE with obvious distaste. "I give it 72 hours, said Larson. "Tribal councils don't deliver ultimatums unless they're already committed to action." "Disagree," said Park. 2 weeks minimum. They'll want to see if Meridian blinks first. Elena listened to the discussion while studying satellite imagery of the surrounding terrain. The Kumuk territory contained dozens of valleys and ridgelines that could conceal attacking forces until they were within striking distance of the oil facility. Traditional perimeter security was almost useless against an enemy who knew the ground and could appear anywhere. "What's your take, Elena?" Marcus asked. "I think they'll probe our defenses first. Test our response times, see how we communicate. Figure out our weak points." She pointed to several locations on the map. "If I were planning an attack, I'd want to know how many snipers you have, where they're positioned, and how quickly they can respond to multiple threats." "Makes sense. So we should expect harassment rather than direct assault. For now. But if they're serious about forcing Meridian out, harassment won't be enough. Eventually, they'll have to try something that does real damage." The probe came. 2 days later, Elena was conducting her morning sector scan when movement caught her eye. A figure on a distant ridgeline, barely visible even with magnification, appeared to be observing the facility through binoculars. "Contact, Sector 4. She reported. "A single individual, ranging approximately 1,500 meters, appears to be conducting surveillance." "Can you identify?" Marcus asked. Elena adjusted her scope's focus, trying to get a clearer image. The figure was wearing traditional robes that blended with the rocky terrain, making identification difficult. But the way he moved, the systematic manner in which he was scanning the facility, this was military reconnaissance. Negative on identification, but movement patterns suggest professional training. He's mapping our positions. Rules of engagement? Elena considered. The figure wasn't presenting an immediate threat, wasn't armed with anything she could see. But allowing enemy reconnaissance to proceed unchallenged would invite more aggressive probing. Request permission to fire a warning shot. Let him know we see him. Granted. Elena adjusted her aim to a spot about 10 meters from the figure's position and squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber round struck a boulder with a crack that echoed across the valley. The figure immediately disappeared behind cover, but Elena had made her point. Warning shot fired. Target has withdrawn. Nice work. That should give them something to think about. But over the next several days, the probes intensified. Figures appeared on different ridgelines, always at extreme range, always conducting obvious surveillance. Someone was mapping Sterling's capabilities and responses, building a picture of how the security team operated. Elena found herself playing a cat-and-mouse game with unseen opponents. She'd spot a reconnaissance position, fire a warning shot, and watch the observer withdraw. But they always came back, sometimes from the same position, sometimes from a new one. They're getting bolder, she reported during the evening briefing. Today's observer held position for 15 minutes after my warning shot. He was definitely collecting detailed intelligence. Marcus studied the map where Elena had marked each contact. Pattern suggests they're preparing for something specific. All these observation points have clear lines of sight to our critical infrastructure, which means they're planning to hit something important, Elena said. Not just harassment something. That will do real damage. The question is when and how. Elena pointed to the satellite imagery. If I were Umarov, I'd wait until we got comfortable with the probing pattern, then hit us when we least expect it. Make us think it's just another reconnaissance mission until it's too late. So we stay alert and assume every contact is potentially hostile. More than that, Elena said. We need to start hunting them instead of just reacting. Right now, they're gathering intelligence while we're giving away our positions and capabilities. We need to turn the tables. Marcus looked intrigued. What do you have in mind? Let me take a patrol out tomorrow night. Get into their territory, see what they're planning. Maybe disrupt their operations instead of just defending against them. That's outside your assigned role. Elena met his eyes. My assigned role is long-range threat assessment and elimination. Can't eliminate threats if I don't know where they are. Marcus considered for a moment. Take Peter with you, and Elena? If you find Umarov out there, don't hesitate. Elena and Peter left the compound at 020. Moving through a gap in the perimeter fence that was invisible to casual observation, but allowed rapid egress for patrol teams. They were dressed in local clothing, traditional robes over body armor, with weapons concealed beneath the fabric. From a distance, they'd look like nomadic herders moving across the steppe. Elena carried her Barrett M82 broken down in a shepherd's pack, along with night vision equipment and enough ammunition for a sustained engagement. Peter had a compact assault rifle and the kind of close-quarters weapons that suggested he expected trouble at short range. Intel says there's a Kumyk camp about 8 kilometers northeast, Peter whispered as they moved across the dark landscape. Temporary position, probably scouts rather than main force. Elena nodded, adjusting her night vision goggles. The terrain was rougher than it looked from her observation post-rocky ground, broken by gullies and low ridges that could conceal movement. Perfect country for guerrilla warfare, lousy country for conventional military operations. They moved in tactical bounds, one covering while the other advanced, maintaining noise discipline and avoiding skylining themselves against the horizon. Elena's ranger training kicked in automatically, the movement patterns, the constant awareness of cover and concealment, the mental mapping of escape routes. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached the ridge overlooking the suspected camp location. Elena assembled her rifle while Peter scanned the area with thermal imaging equipment. "Got them," he whispered. 6 individuals around a small fire, 2 vehicles concealed in a ravine, no sentries posted. Elena peered through her scope, switching to thermal mode. The camp was exactly what she'd expected, a temporary position for scouts, not a base for major operations. But the occupants were definitely military, not civilians. Their weapons were stacked nearby, and their positioning showed tactical awareness. "Can you identify any of them?" "Negative. Too far and too dark." Peter paused. "But one of them is definitely the guy who was watching us yesterday. Same height and build." Elena studied the camp through her scope, looking for intelligence that might reveal larger plans. The vehicles were civilian pickup trucks, but modified with gun mounts and armor plating. Military radios were visible near the fire. This was definitely a reconnaissance element, not random travelers. "We could take them," Peter said quietly. Elena considered it. 6 targets at 700 meters, no cover, no escape routes. It would be like shooting fish in a barrel. But it would also escalate the situation dramatically and reveal that Sterling was conducting offensive operations. Orders were to gather intelligence, not start a war. Sometimes you have to start a war to prevent a bigger one. Elena kept watching the camp, looking for anything that might indicate imminent threat to the oil facility. One of the figures stood and walked to a vehicle, returning with what looked like maps or photographs. The group huddled around the materials, pointing and discussing. "They're planning something," Elena murmured. "I wish I could get close enough to see what they're looking at. Or we could encourage them to leave those materials behind." Elena understood his implication. A few well-placed shots would scatter the group and potentially allow recovery of their planning materials. But it would also confirm that Sterling was conducting aggressive patrols, which might provoke exactly the kind of escalation they were trying to prevent. "Negative. We gather intel and withdraw." They spent another hour observing the camp, noting patrol patterns, vehicle capabilities, and communication procedures. Elena photographed everything through her scope's camera system, building a detailed picture of Kumuk tactical capabilities. As dawn approached, the camp began to break up. The scouts extinguished their fire, loaded their equipment, and prepared to move out. Elena tracked them through her scope as they departed in different directions, some heading back toward known Kumuk territory, others moving toward positions that would allow continued surveillance of the oil facility. Pattern suggests they're establishing a network of observation posts, Elena reported as she and Peter began their withdrawal. Coordinated surveillance that covers all approaches to Tengri, which means they're getting ready for something big. You don't establish that kind of intelligence network unless you're planning a major operation. The return journey was slower, complicated by increasing daylight and the need to avoid civilian traffic on the roads. Elena and Peter had to detour, twice to avoid herders moving livestock, and once to let a government patrol pass without noticing them. They reached the oil facility as the morning shift was beginning work. Elena's observation post seemed almost luxurious after a night moving through hostile territory, climate-controlled, well-stocked with food and water, and equipped with communications that didn't require whispering. "Intel report," Marcus said. When she radioed in, Elena provided a detailed briefing on what they'd observed, including photographs and her assessment of Kumuk capabilities. The conclusion was disturbing. This wasn't random harassment, but systematic preparation for a coordinated attack. "Timeline estimate?" Marcus asked. "Based on the level of preparation, I'd say they're almost ready. Maybe 48 hours, probably. Less. Copy that. We'll increase security posture accordingly." But Elena was already thinking beyond defensive measures. The Kumyk scouts had revealed their general location and methods, which meant Sterling now had actionable intelligence. The question was whether they'd use it. That question was answered the next morning when Marcus called her to the command center. "Change of mission," he said without preamble. "Meridian's corporate headquarters has decided that passive defense isn't sufficient. They want us to take proactive measures to disrupt Kumyk operations." Elena felt a familiar surge of anticipation. What kind of proactive measures? The kind that requires exceptional marksmanship at extended range. Marcus pulled out aerial photographs that showed a compound about 12 kilometers from the oil facility. "This is Umarov's current headquarters. Intelligence confirms he's there personally, planning the attack on Tengri." Elena studied the photographs. The compound was well defended, positioned on high ground with clear fields of fire in all directions. But there were several ridgelines within range that could provide shooting positions for a skilled sniper. What's the mission? Eliminate Dastan Umarov before he can launch his attack. Make it look like tribal infighting rather than American intervention. Elena looked at the mission parameters Marcus was laying out. It was exactly the kind of operation her court-martial had supposedly been about, a soldier making life and death decisions without direct oversight, taking action that could have strategic consequences. The difference was that this time, nobody was ordering her not to pull the trigger. "When do I leave?" "Tonight. Peter will provide overwatch and extraction support. Rules of engagement are simple. If you have a clear shot at Umarov, take it. If the situation becomes untenable, withdraw and we'll reassess." Elena nodded, already planning the approach route and shooting positions. It was exactly the kind of mission she'd trained for, the kind of precision operation that required everything she'd learned about long-range marksmanship, fieldcraft, and mission planning. "One question," she said. "What happens if Umarov's death doesn't stop the attack? What if someone else takes over?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Then we'll deal with that problem when it comes up. Right now, our job is to remove the most immediate threat to American personnel and infrastructure." Elena spent the rest of the day preparing equipment and studying intelligence reports on Umarov's compound. The target was dangerous, well protected, and located in the heart of hostile territory. It was exactly the kind of mission that could go catastrophically wrong. It was also exactly the kind of mission Elena had been born to execute. The tension is building. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which character you're rooting for. Your support helps me create more incredible stories like this one. Elena's final equipment check revealed everything she'd come to expect from Sterling. Security solutions, the best money could buy, maintained to perfection, and designed for missions that didn't officially exist. Her Barrett M82 had been modified, with a suppressor that reduced but didn't eliminate the rifle's signature. The scope was a military-grade thermal and optical hybrid capable of target acquisition at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. "Primary shooting position is here," she told Peter, indicating a ridge approximately 1,200 meters from Umarov's compound. "Good concealment, multiple escape routes, and clear line of sight to the main building." Peter studied the topographical maps spread across the table. "What about wind compensation at that range?" "Already calculated. Prevailing winds are from the southeast at 8 to 12 knots. I've got adjustment tables for different conditions." Elena traced her finger along the planned approach route. "We'll move in from the north, following this stream to avoid sentries, then climb to the shooting position under cover of darkness." "Extraction?" "Same route in reverse if everything goes according to plan. If things go sideways, we've got 3 alternate routes marked." Elena looked at Peter seriously. "This is a one-shot mission. Once I fire, we have maybe 10 minutes before every Kumyk fighter in the area converges on our position." "Understood. What's your confidence level on target identification?" Elena pulled up digital photographs of Umarov, taken by Sterling's intelligence network. Distinctive facial features, specific height and build. Usually wears a particular style of military fatigues. I've studied enough surveillance footage to identify him at range under various lighting conditions. And if you can't get a clean shot, then we abort and try again tomorrow night. This only works if I'm absolutely certain of the target. Marcus joined them for the final briefing, bringing updated intelligence from sources inside the Kumik organization. Umarov's planning to move against Tengri tomorrow evening, just after sunset. Intelligence suggests a coordinated assault using approximately 50 fighters, with the objective of capturing American personnel rather than just damaging infrastructure. Elena felt a chill. Kidnapping American oil workers would create an international incident, exactly the kind of publicity that would force Meridian to abandon their operations. Hostage situation, exactly. Which makes tonight our last chance to stop him before he puts American lives at direct risk. The stakes were clear. Elena wasn't just eliminating a military target. She was preventing a scenario that could escalate into something much larger and more dangerous. As darkness fell over the Kazimirstan steppe, Elena and Peter slipped out of the compound through the same gap they'd used for their reconnaissance mission. But this time, they carried enough firepower to fight their way out of a major engagement, and enough equipment to sustain operations for several days if extraction became impossible. The 12-kilometer movement to the target area took 4 hours of careful navigation through terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and conceal enemies. Elena's night vision equipment revealed a landscape of shadows and potential threats. Every rock formation and depression a possible ambush position. Movement, 2 o'clock, Peter whispered when they were still 3 kilometers from the target. Elena froze, scanning the indicated direction through her scope. A patrol of 4 men moving in tactical formation, armed with assault rifles and moving with the confidence of people who owned this territory. Perimeter security, Elena breathed. They're expanding their patrol routes. They waited 15 minutes for the patrol to pass, then continued their approach using a longer route that avoided known sentry positions. Elena's respect for Umarov's tactical capabilities increased with each obstacle they encountered. This wasn't amateur-hour guerrilla warfare, but professional military planning applied to irregular operations. The shooting position was everything Elena had hoped for. A natural depression in the ridge provided concealment from 3 directions, while a gap between 2 boulders created a window with clear line of sight to Umarov's compound. The range was exactly 1,247 meters, according to her laser rangefinder. Elena assembled her rifle while Peter established overwatch positions and escape routes. The compound below was well lit by generator-powered floodlights, revealing a collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by defensive positions and vehicle parks. I count approximately 30 individuals, Elena reported quietly. Mix of sentries and personnel moving between buildings. Any sign of Umarov? Elena systematically scanned each building through her thermal scope, looking for the distinctive heat signature and movement patterns she'd memorized from surveillance footage. Most of the compound's occupants were engaged in routine activities, maintenance, guard duty, meal preparation. Then she found him. Target acquired, she whispered. Main building, 2nd floor window, reviewing documents with 2 other individuals. Peter adjusted his own optics to confirm. That's him. Distinctive facial hair, correct build and height. Elena settled into her shooting position, adjusting the rifle's bipod and confirming her sight picture. At 1,247 meters, she was well within her effective range, but environmental factors would affect bullet trajectory. Temperature was dropping, which would increase air density and change ballistic performance. Wind was gusting irregularly, requiring constant compensation. Range confirmed at 1,247 meters, she murmured. working through the calculations that would put her bullet exactly where it needed to go. Wind from southeast at variable speed, temperature dropping, humidity approximately 60%. Elena's breathing slowed as she entered the meditative state that preceded every important shot. The world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, the gentle pressure of her finger on the trigger, and the target moving through his normal activities 1,200 meters away. Umarov stood, walked to a map mounted on the wall, and pointed to specific locations while speaking to his subordinates. Elena could see him clearly through the thermal scope, the heat signature of his body distinct against the cooler background, his movements confident and animated. "Wind check," she whispered. Peter observed the movement of dust and debris around the compound. "Southeast at approximately 10 knots, gusting to 15. Elena made final adjustments to her scope, compensating for wind drift and the slight upward angle of her shot. At this range, every variable mattered. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the rotation of the Earth would affect bullet trajectory. Umarov moved back to the window, silhouetted against the interior lighting as he continued his briefing. Elena could see the documents spread. On the table behind him, maps, photographs, what looked like detailed plans for the assault on Tengri. "Shot opportunity," she breathed, "clear to engage." Elena's finger found the trigger's first stage, her breathing controlled and steady. In Afghanistan, she'd made shots like this dozens of times, eliminating targets who threatened American forces. But those had been in active combat zones, with clear rules of engagement and direct military authorization. This was different. This was a precision assassination in a country where America wasn't officially at war, targeting a man who hadn't yet committed the crimes he was planning. It was exactly the kind of operation that created international incidents and congressional investigations. It was also exactly the kind of shot that would save American lives. Elena's breathing stopped at the natural pause between inhalation and exhalation. The crosshairs settled on Umarov's center mass. Her finger completed the trigger pull with the smooth, inevitable pressure she'd practiced thousands of times. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The suppressor reduced but didn't eliminate the sound, producing a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding ridges. Elena immediately cycled the bolt and reacquired her target through the scope. Through the compound's window, she could see the impact. Umarov had been thrown backward against the far wall, his body motionless on the floor while his subordinates dove for cover. Papers scattered across the room as men shouted and pointed toward the windows. "Target down," Elena reported calmly. "Clean hit, center mass. Confirm kill?" Elena watched the scene through her scope as Kumyk fighters rushed into the room. No movement from Umarov's position, no signs of life. At 1,247 meters, with a .50 caliber round to the chest, survival was effectively impossible. Confirmed. The target is KIA. Already, the compound was erupting into chaos. Vehicles started moving, searchlights swept the surrounding hills, and radio chatter filled the airwaves as Kumyk forces tried to locate the shooter. Elena could see fighters spreading out in organized search patterns, but they were looking in the wrong directions. "Time to go," Peter said. Elena disassembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, stowing the components in her pack within 90 seconds. They began their withdrawal immediately, using the planned escape route that would take them away from the compound along a different path than their approach. As they moved through the darkness, Elena could hear vehicles and voices in the distance. Sounds of an organization that had just lost its leader and was struggling to respond. But the sounds were growing fainter, not closer, which meant their escape route was working. 4 hours later, they reached the outer perimeter of the oil facility. Elena's radio crackled with Marcus's voice. "Overwatch, report status." "Mission accomplished," Elena replied. "Package delivered, no complications. Outstanding. Return to base for debrief." As Elena walked back to her quarters, she felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and emptiness that followed successful missions. She'd eliminated a threat to American personnel, prevented what could have been a major international incident, and demonstrated the value of precision, military operations in complex political situations. She'd also killed a man who'd never had a chance to surrender in a country where America wasn't officially at war, on the orders of a private military company that answered to corporate interests rather than national policy. It was exactly the kind of moral complexity that made modern warfare so different from the clear-cut conflicts of earlier generations. Elena had done her job with exceptional skill and professional competence. Whether that job was right or wrong was a question for philosophers and politicians. For Elena, it was enough that American workers would go home to their families instead of being kidnapped by fanatics. The retaliation came faster than anyone expected. Elena was in her observation post at 0630, conducting routine morning surveillance, when explosions rocked the oil facility. Not the distant pops of small arms fire or the controlled detonations of demolition work, but the deep, earth-shaking blasts of military-grade explosives. Multiple explosions, south perimeter, she reported into her radio. Large-scale coordinated attack. Through her scope, Elena could see the results of what appeared to be simultaneously detonated improvised explosive devices. 3 sections of the perimeter fence had been breached, and Cumic fighters were pouring through the gaps in organized assault formations. This wasn't random revenge, this was a planned operation that had been accelerated in response to Umarov's death. All stations, this is command. Marcus's voice was calm despite the chaos. We are under coordinated assault from multiple directions. Implement Defensive Plan Alpha. Repeat, Defensive Plan Alpha. Elena swung her scope toward the largest breach, where approximately 15 fighters were advancing toward the main processing facility. They moved with military precision, using cover and suppressive fire to advance in tactical bounds. These weren't tribal irregulars, they were trained soldiers. Op 3 has targets, she reported, requesting permission to engage. Granted. Priority targets are RPG teams and squad leaders. Elena identified her first target, a fighter carrying an RPG-7 launcher, positioning himself to engage one of the oil facility's storage tanks. Range, 623 meters. Wind, minimal. Clear shot. She fired. The .50 caliber round struck the RPG gunner center mass, eliminating the immediate threat to critical infrastructure. Elena immediately shifted to acquire her next target, a man who appeared to be directing the assault team's movement. But, as she settled her crosshairs on the second target, muzzle flashes erupted from a ridgeline 800 meters to her north. Heavy machine gun fire raked her observation post, forcing her to dive for cover as rounds sparked off the concrete walls. Op 3 taking direct fire, she reported. They've located my position. This was bad. Elena's observation post had been designed to be invisible from ground level, concealed and hardened against small arms fire. The fact that attackers had identified and engaged her position meant they'd conducted detailed reconnaissance and planned this assault specifically to neutralize Sterling's overwatch capabilities. More troubling, it meant they'd identified her as a priority target. Op 3, can you relocate? Marcus asked. Elena assessed her situation. The machine gun fire was accurate and sustained, keeping her pinned behind cover. But the concrete bunker could withstand anything short of direct hits from heavy weapons, and she still had clear fields of fire toward other sectors. Negative on relocation. The position is hardened and still operational. She raised her rifle toward the machine gun position. I can counter snipe from here. Elena switched to thermal imaging and began systematically scanning the enemy position. Machine guns required crews of at least 2, usually 3 people. If she could eliminate the gunners, The weapon would be temporarily neutralized, their heat signatures behind a rocky outcropping, partially concealed but visible to thermal optics. Elena calculated range and wind compensation, then settled into her shooting position. The first shot eliminated the machine gunner. The second took out the assistant gunner who tried to take over the weapon. The machine gun fire stopped, giving Elena freedom to engage targets in the main assault, but even as she re-engaged the primary attack, more problems developed. Explosions erupted throughout the oil facility as attackers employed satchel charges against critical infrastructure. Storage tanks ruptured, spilling crude oil that immediately ignited. Processing equipment exploded in cascading secondary blasts. "They're targeting the facility itself," Elena reported. "This isn't just an attack on personnel. They're trying to destroy Meridian's entire operation," which meant the stakes had escalated beyond simple security work. Meridian had invested over $1 billion in extraction equipment, and the attackers were systematically destroying everything they could reach. Elena identified another priority: target a team positioning demolition charges against the main pumping station. If they succeeded, the entire pipeline system would be crippled for months. Range 445 meters. Clear line of sight. No wind compensation required. She fired rapidly, eliminating 2 demolition specialists before they could complete their work. But there were more teams, more targets than she could engage simultaneously. Op 3 to command: "I need support." "Too many targets for a single shooter." "Copy that. Larson is moving to your position with additional weapons." Elena continued engaging targets as the Norwegian explosives expert fought his way toward her position. Through her scope, she could see the battle developing across the entire facility. Sterling contractors and local security guards engaging. Attackers who seemed to know exactly where to hit for maximum damage. Eric. Larson reached her position carrying a squad automatic weapon and enough ammunition to sustain prolonged fire. "Heard you needed some company," he said, setting up his weapon to cover a different sector. "Multiple demolition teams," Elena reported. "They're hitting infrastructure targets systematically." "Any sign of overall command and control?" Elena swept her scope across the battlefield, looking for indicators of centralized leadership. Most of the attackers were operating in small, independent teams, but she could see one position where several fighters had gathered around radio equipment. "Possible command post, bearing 045 degrees, range 800 meters. Larson acquired the target through his optics. "I see them. Want me to discourage their communications?" "Do it." Larson's automatic weapon sent a sustained burst toward the command position, forcing the radio operators to abandon their equipment and seek cover. But the damage was already done. The attack was proceeding according to plan, and individual tactical victories weren't stopping the overall assault. Elena's radio crackled with reports from across the facility. 2 American engineers were trapped in the main control building. 3 local guards had been overrun at the East Gate. Sterling contractors were fighting room-to-room battles in the administration complex. "We're losing this," Larson said bluntly. "Too many of them, too well coordinated." Elena studied the tactical situation through her scope. The attackers had achieved surprise, committed sufficient forces to overwhelm static defenses, and demonstrated detailed knowledge of the facility's layout and vulnerabilities. This was exactly the kind of assault Umarov had been planning, and his death had accelerated rather than prevented it. But there was something else, something that bothered Elena. About the timing and coordination of the attack. "Eric, this assault started less than 8 hours after we killed Umarov. How did they organize something this complex so quickly?" Larson paused in his firing to consider the question. "They couldn't. This operation was already planned and positioned. Umarov's death was just the trigger." Elena felt a chill of understanding, which means they expected him to be killed. "They wanted us to take that shot." The implications were staggering. If the Kumyk forces had anticipated Umarov's assassination and planned their response accordingly, then Elena had walked into a trap. Her perfectly executed sniper mission had actually played into enemy hands, providing them with justification for an assault they'd been planning all along. "We need to get word to Marcus," Elena said. "This whole thing might be a setup." But before she could relay her suspicions, new contacts appeared on the northern ridge, the same position where she'd eliminated the machine gun team. More fighters. "We're taking position, and these carried weapons Elena recognized immediately. Contact north. They've got a mortar team setting up." Mortar could destroy her observation post, eliminate Sterling's overwatch capability, and leave the facility defenseless against assault teams that were already inside the perimeter. Elena had perhaps 30 seconds before the first rounds would. "Impact. Take the mortar position," Larson said. "I'll cover you." Elena shifted her rifle toward the new threat, acquiring targets through her thermal scope. The mortar crew was working efficiently, setting up their weapon with the speed that came from extensive training. But they were also exposed, silhouetted. Against the morning sky, her first shot eliminated the gunner. The second took out the assistant, who tried to complete the firing sequence. But there were more crew members, and they were already adjusting their tactics to account for sniper fire. "More teams moving up," Larson reported. "This is getting untenable." Elena could see what he meant. The northern ridge was crawling with fighters, and they were setting up multiple heavy weapons positions. Her observation post, which had been nearly invulnerable to small arms fire, was about to come under sustained assault from crew-served weapons. Op 3 to command, requesting immediate extraction. Position about to be overrun. Marcus's response was immediate and concerning, negative. On extraction. Command post is under direct assault. All units consolidate on the main administration building. Elena looked toward the administration building through her scope. It was already surrounded by attackers, with Sterling contractors visible at the windows engaging in defensive firefights. Consolidating there would mean abandoning her position and leaving the facility without overwatch. It would also mean walking into what appeared to be a carefully planned trap. "Eric, what's your assessment of reaching the admin building?" Larson studied the route through his optics. 600 meters of open ground under direct fire from multiple positions. "Call it a 20% chance of making it intact." Elena made her decision. "Then we don't go there. We stay here and do our job until the position becomes completely untenable." "And if it does become untenable?" Elena checked her ammunition supply. 60 rounds remaining for her rifle, plus whatever Larson was carrying for his automatic weapon. Enough for perhaps 20 minutes of sustained combat. "Then we make sure we take as many of them with us as possible." As if summoned by her words, the first mortar rounds began falling around her position. The mortar bombardment lasted 12 minutes and transformed Elena's observation post from a hardened defensive position into a partially collapsed concrete tomb. Shrapnel had spiderwebbed the reinforced windows. Dust and debris filled the air, and several direct hits had cracked the roof structure. But Elena and Larson were still alive, still fighting, and still inflicting casualties on attackers who'd clearly expected the position to be abandoned by now. "Reload," Larson called out, dropping behind cover as another mortar round impacted nearby. Elena passed him a fresh magazine for his automatic weapon, then returned to her rifle. Through the cracked optics of her scope, she could see the assault teams reorganizing for what appeared to be a final push toward the administration building. "Count 15 moving toward the east entrance," she reported. "Looks like they're preparing for a coordinated breach." But even as Elena tracked the obvious assault, movement on the northern ridge caught her attention. More fighters were moving into position, but these weren't carrying the AK-47s and RPGs typical of tribal irregulars. These men had modern military equipment, advanced optics, suppressed weapons, coordinated communications gear. "Eric, look at Sector 7. Those aren't Kumyk fighters." Larson shifted his attention to the indicated area, studying the new arrivals through his own optics. "You're right. Equipment's too advanced, movements too professional. Who the hell are they?" Elena adjusted her scope's magnification, trying to get a better look at the mysterious fighters. Their uniforms were unmarked, but the cut and quality suggested military issue rather than civilian gear. More importantly, they were positioning themselves to observe the battle rather than participate in it. "They're not here to fight," Elena realized. "They're here to watch," which raised disturbing questions about who might be interested in observing a battle between Sterling contractors and Kumyk irregulars in the middle of nowhere, Kazakhstan. Foreign intelligence services, rival military contractors, corporate competitors looking to assess Sterling's capabilities. Before Elena could pursue the question further, her radio crackled with Marcus's voice. "All stations, be advised we have confirmed American casualties." "Repeat, confirmed American casualties." Elena felt her stomach drop. Casualties in private military terminology usually meant dead, not just wounded. Sterling had taken real losses, which meant the attackers were winning despite Elena's successful overwatch work. "Op 3, what's your status?" Marcus asked. "Position damaged but operational," Elena reported. "Still providing overwatch and engaging targets of opportunity." "Copy that." "Be advised, extraction helicopters are inbound. ETA 40 minutes. 40 minutes felt like an eternity given their current situation. Elena checked her ammunition, again 36 rounds remaining for her rifle, plus whatever Larson had left. They could hold the position for perhaps 20 more minutes of active combat. "Any chance those helicopters can provide close air support?" Larson asked. Elena relayed the question to Marcus, but his response was disappointing. "Negative. Extraction birds only, no gunships. Rules of engagement prohibit offensive air operations." "Whose rules of engagement?" Elena asked, static-filled. The radio for several seconds before Marcus responded. "That's above my pay grade. Elena, just hold your position until extraction." The evasive answer confirmed Elena's growing suspicions about this entire operation. Someone was imposing restrictions on Sterling's response that didn't make tactical sense. Someone with authority over Marcus and resources to coordinate helicopter extraction from this remote location. "We're not the only players on this board," she told Larson. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone's running a larger game here, and we're just pieces being moved around." Elena gestured toward the mysterious observers on the northern ridge. "Those guys aren't here by accident. This whole situation feels orchestrated." Larson considered this while engaging a team of attackers who were attempting to flank their position. "You think Sterling set us up?" "I think someone did. The question is who and why." Before Larson could respond, Elena's scope picked up movement that changed everything. Among the mystery observers on the northern ridge, one figure was different from the others, taller, more distinctive, wearing the kind of modern combat gear that cost more than most soldiers made in a year. Elena adjusted her scope's focus, studying the figure's movement patterns and equipment profile. Something about his bearing, his positioning, the way other fighters deferred to him, seemed familiar. Then he turned, and Elena got a clear look at his face through her thermal scope. "Son of a bitch," she breathed. "What?" "Dastan Umarov. He's alive." Larson stopped shooting to stare at her. "That's impossible. You killed him last night." Elena kept her scope trained on the figure, confirming details she'd memorized from intelligence photographs. Height, build, facial features, even the specific style of military gear Umarov favored. There was no doubt the man she'd supposedly killed was very much alive and observing the battle from a position of safety. "Either I killed Umarov's twin brother, or someone fed us bad intelligence about his location." The implications were staggering. If Umarov was alive, then Elena's perfectly executed sniper mission had killed someone else, possibly an innocent person, possibly a deliberate decoy. Either way, it meant Sterling's intelligence had been compromised or deliberately falsified. "We need to report this," Larson said. Elena tried to raise Marcus on the radio, but got only static in response. Either the radio was damaged, or communications were being jammed. Given everything else that had gone wrong, Elena suspected the latter. "Can't reach command," she reported. "We're on our own," which meant Elena had to make a decision without orders or oversight, exactly the kind of situation that had gotten her court-martialed in the first place. She could maintain her current position and continue providing defensive fire until extraction, or she could attempt to engage Umarov and complete the mission she'd thought she'd already accomplished. "Range to target?" Larson asked, reading her intentions. Elena checked her laser rangefinder. 1,400 meters, long shot, but within my effective range. Environmental factors? Wind from the southeast at 12 knots, temperature rising, humidity dropping. Elena worked through the ballistic calculations in her head. Difficult shot, but achievable. The question was whether she should take it. Engaging Umarov would reveal their position to the observers, potentially compromising the extraction. But allowing him to escape would mean the threat to American personnel and infrastructure would continue. Elena thought about the 20 soldiers she'd saved in that dusty courtyard, about the court-martial that had destroyed her military,